Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
You're listening to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, only on Revolution Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Jim White and Jason Van Tatenhove.
The crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
Please hang up and try again.
Joining us on the line right now is Dave Hodges. Dave has worn a lot of hats throughout his life. He's a former college basketball coach, a former mental health counselor, a psychology, sociology, and research professor. And Dave currently hosts the Common Sense Show, which airs from 9 p.m. to midnight on Sunday evenings. Dave is also the proprietor of the Common Sense Show website, which can be found by going to thecommonsenseshow.com. Dave Hodges, thanks for joining us this afternoon on the Liberty Brothers Radio Show.
Well, I'm glad to be with you. Let's hope we can maintain our connection.
Indeed. I'm optimistic. If we can, let's kick right off, Dave. You just published. I just read the story that you published about Obama, sort of a Manchurian candidate. Very interesting. I've suspected for some time. I'm familiar with the background of his Bill Ayers and what's her name, Bernadine Dorn, I think is her name, or something like that. And I'm familiar with that whole crew, those whole crew of criminals, really. Give us a little bit of background on that. Flesh that out a little bit, if you could. Go over that article, because I found that very interesting, and I agree with you.
Well, Obama, I believe, is the manifestation of a decades-long plot. And the plot was actually revealed by Soviet defectors saying, we're going to conquer your media, we're going to conquer a lot of your aspects of life, including your politics. And I think Obama is the manifestation of that. If you go way back and start at the beginning, we have Obama, his mother, Ann Dunham, worked for Tim Geithner's father at the CIA front known as the Ford Foundation. It was a PSYOPs organization. And it's where they did MK-Ultra work. It's where they also trained other Manchurian candidates. And Barack Obama is not the only Obama to have been affiliated with us. His half-brother, Malik Obama, was also affiliated with us. And Malik Obama today is the head of arms distribution and procurement, as well as finance for the Muslim Brotherhood, the president's half-brother. What a lovely family they have. And so Obama was exposed to this at a very, very early age. At the age of 9, he was reunited with his father, Frank Marshall Davis. And this is why I'm in complete harmony with Joel Gilbert and the late Larry Grathwall, who I had on my show a number of times. And they both exposed the connections that follow this when eventually Barack Obama has his college education paid for by Tom Ayers. Now, who's Tom Ayers? Tom Ayers was the head of Con Ed of Illinois, and he was the father of Bill Ayers, the head of the radical group known as the Weatherman Underground. Now, a lot of people who don't know their history think that this was just a hippie, anti-Vietnam War kind of organization that faded away when the Vietnam War died down. Not so. They were dedicated. They were red diaper babies, meaning they were avowed communists, came from rich families, and most of them were Ivy League educated with advanced degrees. And so certainly, Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn, very well educated. It just so happens that these two, who have criminal records resulting from their actions in the Weatherman Underground, Bill Ayers was associated with the murder of a San Francisco policeman. Bernadine Dorn actually did time in prison, and this is why she can't hold a law degree today, for her role in an armed car robbery to fund this group in which 2 security guards were killed. So we've got 2 thug criminals, and who are they? Well, they're the 2 that launched the education of Barack Obama at Harvard, and Tom Ayers also helped to pay for it. My source on that, Joe Gilbert, Larry Grathwall, and a guy named Hutton, who was the postman for Tom Ayers, And Hutton told stories about how he encountered Obama, and he basically told him the whole story. A foreign-born Obama, I would add. And Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Maricopa County in Arizona, where I live, the famous Sheriff Joe, investigated Obama's birth certificate and came across this information as well. So we have three highly credible sources that talk about elements of the Weatherman Underground who basically brought this president into politics. They launched his state senatorial campaign from their Hyde Park home, and I'm speaking they being Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn. So Obama's got a real shaky beginning with his affiliations. In fact, it's even getting more interesting, guys, when you look at the affiliation between Valerie Jarrett's family and the heirs in through the Weatherman Underground. Valerie Jarrett's father-in-law is Vernon Jarrett, and he used to write for a communist newspaper. He was a member of the Communist Party. He espoused communism, as did the Weatherman Underground. And who's the senior White House advisor today? Valerie Jarrett. Rahm Emanuel is also part of this group. So you go right down the list, and it's kind of like the who's who of the Obama administration. And I'll give you something scary to sink your teeth into. Larry Grathwohl told this story on my show twice. 2 times I interviewed him. Larry said that he was asking Bill Ayers, and Larry Grathwohl was an FBI informant who infiltrated the Weatherman Underground as an inside informant. And he asked Bill Ayers, he said, if you guys ever win and take over the government, what will you do? And he said, Bill Ayers hesitated and said, well, and now remember, this is at a time when America had 150 million people. He said, we'll have to send 50 million people to re-education camps in the Southwest, and we'll probably have to do away with half of them. These are the people that launched this president's career. And he is the Soviet manifestation of communism, and he's set into motion a plan. He's working from an agenda to destroy this country.
Wow. And you know what? It just, you can't get away from it, because you look at it and you look at the naked communists and the plans that they put forward to try to destroy our country, and they really have gotten so far down that list that it seems like there may be no getting back from it. How do you think we can actually get away from this, Dave?
It's so ingrained right now, I don't know. I mean, we've lost the presidency. We've lost the key congressional positions. Because of Agenda 21, we're losing state House positions, state legislative positions, city council. It's tough. I mean, if you actually put a gun to my head and said, okay, what's it going to take? And I hate to say this because I'm a nonviolent person, but it's going to take a violent revolution, and the only way it'll succeed is if the people have the military on their side and they execute a military coup.
Well, I tend to think that we do have the military on our side currently. All the reports that I'm getting. Sorry, Jason, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no problem. Actually, I wanted to touch base, Dave, with you on Agenda 21. We actually have a common friend, Stacy Lynn, who's been on your show quite a bit.
Yes.
I know Stacy from Fort Collins, where I used to live. We were both politically active and working to try to fight the good fight there. And we see how, in her case, just how easy it is for them to destroy someone's life for just trying to educate people about what's happening with just Agenda 21. Do you see a lot of this type of political retribution? And for those of our listeners who may not be familiar with Stacy Lynn, she's just a mother who was out there trying to educate city councils and different various local governments and people within northern Colorado about the dangers of Agenda 21, and basically had her life stripped from her. She had her child taken from her. She had tracking devices put on her car. I mean, you can Google Stacy Lynn and see a lot of great YouTube videos out there on her story. But I mean, it seems like that's not an isolated case, that we're seeing more and more of this political repercussion. Do you think we're going to keep seeing more of that?
Well, we already are. In fact, let me start at the beginning of Stacy Lynn. I had someone at one time who was helping me with the show in terms of gathering information and pointing me in directions that were pertinent. and her name was Diane Hunter. And Diane Hunter found Stacy Lynn. And Diane called me and said, Dave, we need to get her on the show. It's a horrible case. Her kid's been stolen from her. And I said, I don't do child custody issues. And I said, we're a little bit more nationally focused than that. And she said, Dave, trust me on this. This is Agenda 21. It's retribution. I said, okay. So she arranged for Stacy to get a hold of me. And Stacy and I talked, gosh, I lose track of time here now, but I think it's going on 3 years ago for the first time. And Stacy and I talked, and I realized very quickly that she was part of an orchestrated plot. And as I set a couple of weeks aside to investigate the background of her case, I found evidence of a very far-reaching conspiracy. In fact, if people want to read, I probably have included Stacy in about 5 articles on my website. I have a search engine. So after the show, if you go to thecommonsenseshow.com and put in Stacy Lynn with an E on the end, and you'll see the articles I've written. But the one I wrote in particular, the very first one, really detailed the corruption. And I think it's really worthwhile going through this with your listening audience. And I know it sounds like you've really got good command of the facts, but let's start at the very beginning. Stacy had a child with a man named Jeffrey Pappenheim. And Stacy will tell you that relationship was the biggest mistake of her life. It was an unintended pregnancy, and so her son Jaden was born, and Jeffrey disavowed his role as a father, never paid child support, and so forth. So Stacy was on her own to raise this boy, and the boy was a well-adjusted kid by all accounts, good student, very likable, but she was doing the Agenda 21 advocacy work, or the anti-Agenda 21 advocacy work, and she got herself into trouble. Now, what ended up happening is Pappenheim suddenly reappears in the picture, and this is after Stacy had been harassed by him. I've heard the audio tapes of him threatening her and the boy. I mean, I've heard these with my own ears. And so, long story short here, he filed an action. Pappenheim filed an action, I believe it was January of 2011, for a dissolution of marriage. Now, they were never married. They were parents that had a child in common, and that was it. Well, the case comes to trial in December. Stacy underestimated the danger because she knew there was no marriage to dissolve, but she came into court prepared to argue the case. I'm married. The court doesn't have jurisdiction other than to set, visitation rights. Well, in that hearing in December of 2012, they stripped Stacy of her parental rights in terms of being the custodial parent. They did not strip her of her parental rights in terms of visitation. But let me talk about who was involved in this case. The judge was Judge Julie Kuntz Field. Now, she didn't become a judge. In fact, Stacy Lynn was her first case. She didn't become a judge until 2011, right before the hearing. Now, who was Stacy Kuntz, or Julie Kuntz Field? She was someone who was a contract litigant attorney for the World Bank and for the IMF. You don't get much more New World Order than that. Now, how did she get into her position in the 8th Circuit Court up there in Fort Collins in Larimer County? She got appointed by outgoing Governor Bill Ritter, who was termed out. Now, what's interesting is Stacy was urinating on the carpet of some very powerful people in Fort Collins, namely someone by the name of Pat Stryker, the owner of Stryker Biotech, a multi-billion-dollar business. She's into a lot of other endeavors. She's friends with Obama. She attended the inaugural ball. She donated $5,000 to it. She mentored under George Soros, by my estimation. And she is the queen of ICLEI Agenda 21 in northern Colorado. She's affiliated with all kinds of globalists.
Oh, yeah, and so, I can tell you, I don't mean to interrupt, I can tell you when President Obama comes to town, he stays overnight just to speak with her.
Yeah, I know that. Well, anyway, Stacy accumulated really powerful enemies, but none bigger than this particular person. And what's interesting is I did some search background on this, and Stryker and Julie Kuntz Field, the judge who issued this horrible decision, had a history going back into the late 1980s. Stryker Biotech was sued for malpractice. And Julie Kuntz Field was part of the law firm out of Ohio that represented Stryker Biotech. So they had a professional relationship that dated back to the 1980s. So right there was a conflict of interest in this trial, but it gets worse. Now, Kuntz's judicial application has been scrubbed from the Internet, but I still have the copy. Kuntz Field listed her address as 120 College Avenue in Fort Collins, Suite 200. That happens to be the business address of one of Stryker Biotech's subsidiaries. I mean, they're joined at the hip here like you wouldn't believe. Now, what's interesting is after Governor Bill Ritter from Colorado was termed out of office, after he had appointed Kuntz Field, he goes to work for Stryker on Agenda 21 issues at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, where he's paid a salary of $300,000 a year. So you had this triumvirate of what I call three really shady characters, in my humble opinion, that conspired to slow Stacy down. You see, one of the things they were doing in Fort Collins is they were trying to drive all the small business owners out of business by making it illegal to bring gasoline-powered cars into downtown Fort Collins. Well, each one of those parking spots was valued at $300,000 a year, according to the Chamber of Commerce, and they wanted to drive these small businesses out so they could rezone and do what they wanted with it. In addition, they also had a Waste Management, and interesting, Waste Management sponsors the Phoenix Open Golf Tour. They're big, and let's put it this way, they have a very questionable background. Tony Soprano's a name that comes to mind. And I won't say much more than that because I don't want to battle them in court, but let's just put it this way, they have a very nefarious reputation. So they wanted to drive out all the other trash companies in Fort Collins and be an exclusive contractor to the city of Fort Collins for removal of trash. And they are connected intimately to Agenda 21. Well, Stacy was fighting against both those issues and won. And that's when Pat Stryker sprung into action. Now, what I don't have, and I'll tell you what I know, and I'll tell you what I can prove. What I know is the father of Stacy's boy, Jaden, Jeffrey Pappenheim, had several tax liens against him. There was a matter of public record, and we've got the documents. We've got copies of the documents, and a lot of us have it. And he's threatened to sue us over talking about this, but you can't sue for the truth. And so all of a sudden, as you get deeper into this case, it looks like these tax liens have disappeared. You can't find them any longer. Now, I can't say for a fact that Jeffrey Pappenheim was induced and Stryker used her influence with Obama and friends at the federal government to get rid of these tax liens. But I'll tell you, it's really suspicious. These tax liens seem to have disappeared at the same time that Pappenheim, who said he wanted nothing to do with being the father of Jaden, to go get her son in a dissolution of marriage action that never existed. Now, what's interesting in the trial, Kuntz Field would not let Stacy call any witnesses. She had witnesses and documents to put into evidence showing what a well-adjusted boy this was and she was a good parent. Julie Kuntz Field would allow none of that to come in, yet the other side was allowed to present all the evidence that they wanted to present. So Stacy's boy was taken. Stacy was thrown in jail because they said she didn't surrender him fast enough. She wasn't even in possession of the boy at the time of the trial, yet a half hour later they had her in jail because the boy was with her parents. So it was a rigged job from the get-go, and it was all designed to take Stacy down as an anti-Agenda 21 advocate. Now here's where your audience is going to become horrified. Stacy hasn't seen Jaden in over 2 years, yet she's never lost her parental visitation rights. The courts, Julie Kuntz Field and friends, will not force Pappenheim to allow Stacy visitation with her son. This is unconscionable, and I'll tell you, it's one of the great shortcomings and failings of my activist career, where I took on this case, and I told Stacy we would never stop until she was reunited with her son. Now, we've done some things for posterity. I mean, our interviews are all over the net and YouTube, my articles and so forth. Someday, young Jaden is going to be old enough to wonder what happened with his mom, and he'll probably start searching the Internet, and I'm hopeful he finds my articles that I've written, in which I demonstrate how the mother illegally had custody taken away from her. That right now is her best case. Now, you said, are these common cases? Yes. It's with a very heavy heart that I have to admit I was not able to get Stacy's kid back for her. And another case involving a lady named Monica Wesolowski, who's a State Department employee. She lives in Virginia, right across from D.C. She had something similar happen to her, only this is a lady who works in the State Department. And the State Department, and personally I'll say this off the top, I don't care what someone's persuasion is or what their politics are, as long as their rights stop at my nose. But Monica is she's a gun rights activist. She has an NRA bumper sticker on her car. She's a conservative, and she works in the State Department that is very much into the gay and the green agenda, and she doesn't fit that profile. Additionally, she had a contact in her apartment building where this man's daughter played with her 5-year-old son, Dylan, and the man was investigating child sex trafficking for the local congressman there. And a lot of people felt that Monica was assisting in this investigation, and it was drawing attention. In Virginia, what the CPS does there is they disappear kids. They take boys from mothers, this is their typical pattern, and they give them out to homosexual men in violation of the law. The law says you have to place a child in a similar home environment from which they come. And they did this with Stacy's son, and he was molested while in these men's care. And a lot of these kids end up being disappeared. They just up and leave. And I've had insiders from the Virginia CPS who've quit who come on my show and given testimony on my show about the fact that when someone moves with these kids, they never have to account for them. They just stop sending them the payment checks for being the custodial parent. And this is how a lot of these kids end up in child sex trafficking. Congressman Frank Wolf, who lives in Monica Wesolowski's district, he's the congressman for her district, has this on his website. He's had this as a prominent issue for several months about the child sex trafficking in Fairfax County, Virginia. Well, this is where Monica's son was headed. She was politically targeted because they thought her affiliation with this man, by the way, the man ended up dying a very mysterious death, but the affiliation, they assumed, I'm sure, that she was assisting in this child sex trafficking operation, leaking information to a congressman, and for that, her son was stolen. Now, Monica's not out of the woods yet. We're still fighting the battle, but she has regained physical custody of the child, and he spends most nights, almost all nights, with his mother. That was a case we were able to turn around that was politically motivated, in which the government uses CPS to go steal kids. Now, you're saying, well, what's the motivation for CPS to do this? Well, for every kid they take, the federal government reimburses them $5,000. If a child has a disability, that number goes up exponentially. And in the case of Dylan Wesolowski, Dylan is on the autism spectrum, so he's worth a lot of money to the Virginia CPS. And the horrors this woman went through, terrible. Now, unfortunately, when I was helping Stacy, I could do little more than advocacy and ask the people donate to her legal relief fund, which didn't amount to a whole lot. Later on, I discovered when I came across Monica's case, there was something called GoFundMe, and I've used the people at GoFundMe to raise over $35,000 for Monica's legal defense fund. We got 2 lawyers for her who have some legal bite, and we were able to get this nonsense stopped. But she's still not totally out of the woods yet. I mean, it's such a corrupt system. These people know that sex trafficking is going on, and I'm talking about the district attorney in Fairfax County. They know it's happening. The CPS and the Department of Family Services there, they know it's happening. I've had their ex-agents on my show talking about this. It's a totally corrupt and criminal organization, and they prey on kids, and they turn them into child sex trafficking factories. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. It's not hard to prove. And if people will just Google Monica with a K, Wesolowski, Wesolowski, they can see how this case unfolded. The first article that I wrote was on or about May 17th of this year. So that was one we were able to somewhat resolve satisfactorily, but we're not out of the woods.
You know, Dave, you talked earlier about Tony Soprano. You know, to me, from where I'm looking at things, it looks to me like our government pretty much operates like a mafia. You know, we had touched on this yesterday during our broadcast. It's almost like, you know, sort of the IRS or the ATF is their enforcement arm. The IRS is their collection arm, and you know, it's all of our money, everything we make. You know, we got to kick something back up to them. You know, just like a mob boss, we got to kick our earnings up to the top. I mean, do you see it almost being loosely structured like a mafia?
Very much so. And if you go too far, you end up like Tom Clancy, Breitbart, and Michael Hastings. Yeah, very much so. It's very much a mafia. These officials get up and they swear their oath to protect and defend the United States from enemies, foreign and domestic. They promise to obey and defend the Constitution. They look real good in their suits, but the fact is they're just the same as any mafia organization. Like, let me tell you how mafia they are. I've been working with a DEA agent who's actually active. And it's kind of unusual to get someone active in one of the alphabet soups to help you, but he's been helping me. He actually, without going into the depth of the story that we were involved in, what I learned from him, and this is publicly available information, is that the DEA cut a deal with the Sinaloa Mexican drug cartel to allow 80% of their drug shipments to come into the country. Why 80? Because they got to justify their position by taking 20% and sending a few people to jail, but they let the 80% come through. In Chicago District Court, this came out in 2010. Now, I would not have known where to look because national media didn't give this one iota of attention, but sure enough, the local Chicago papers did, and he pointed me in that direction. You don't get much more mafia than that.
Wow. Dave, there's something that's been on the radar that's been concerning me. You know, the Ebola outbreak seemed to have gotten so much hype at first, and you know, whether or not you believe it's real or a hoax, or, you know, I personally think it's probably somewhere in the middle, that there is a certain amount of it happening, but you're obviously creating that fear porn environment. But it seems like everything has been quieted down, too quiet, so to say. And we hear these reports of doctors being, or not doctors, but patients being disappeared and whisked away like they were never there. What are your thoughts as to what's happening with the Ebola and this kind of calm that we seem to be in now? Do you think there's something behind that?
Yeah, let's start at the beginning on the Ebola thing. We were on this, and I say we, being my news director and I, were on this back in May with the illegal immigration invasion that really stepped up. And I had a conversation with a doctor here in Arizona named Dr. Jane Orient, and she's one of the top physicians in our state. She's the head of a lot of different boards. And she and I have done interviews together before. And I called her and I said, what do you think? Are you worried about diseases coming in? She goes, yeah, but I'm really, really worried about the transmission of Ebola. And she said, it only takes one. Border Patrol members had told her off the record, and later I got Border Patrol members to tell me this off the record, that there are an estimated 10,000 West Africans from the 7-country affected region where there's the Ebola outbreaks operating in the drug trafficking trade in Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, etc., and they routinely are used as couriers to cross the border. And as Dr. Orient said on my show in early June, it's not a matter of if Ebola comes in, it's a matter of when. So we got on that very early as a result of our interest in this, and I started doing research. Now, research is something I do fairly well. I don't want to toot my own horn, but if I have a skill, it's in how to find out things, particularly using university database searches. And I saw the CDC was saying, well, we have nothing to worry about, guys. It's only can be transmitted through bodily fluids, almost made it sound like AIDS, and if you didn't have sex with somebody, you could never get Ebola. And I thought, okay, well, let's see if that's true. And I started to look into some of the professional literature that was done. Well, I found somewhere around 45 to 50 academic studies. I mean, academic studies, peer-reviewed, you know, using control samples and so forth. and they told an entirely different story. I found out by the middle and end of June that Ebola could live outside the body at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, 55% humidity. Ebola Reston could stay outside for about 3 hours and survive, and Ebola Zaire about half that amount of time. And that means it's transmissible. Then I found studies that said it was airborne. And the first study I found was a research study that started in 2009 in Canada with Canadian government scientists. And they published their findings in 2012, and they talked about how Ebola went from pigs to primates, airborne. And I thought, well, they're both mammals. And this really got my attention. I thought, this is probably going to be airborne with humans since we're also mammals. Well, I dug into it, and then they talked about aerosolized spreading. So if you are sick in the toilet and you flush the toilet, the aerosolized particles that are microscopic, you can't even see, can be transmitted several feet. Sneezing, so forth and so on. And so I found out they were lying to us. Now, I can't say that Ebola spreads like the flu on air currents, but I can tell you in a confined environment, it's very much airborne in many, many different ways. And there are almost 50 studies that show this conclusively, academic studies, not stuff from the internet, but stuff where you go on like Lancet and they publish something from some British set of scientists that studied it, or Canadian scientists. So I knew the CDC was lying to us. And then lo and behold, I discovered the CDC owns the patent on Ebola. And I know enough about patents to know that you can't own something in nature. And I said, oh, this is not a good sign, because this means it's not the base disease. It means they own something that's been artificially modified. And as I dug deeper into this, I found that the U.S. Army infectious disease laboratories in Fort Detrick were involved with the CDC in the creation of a vaccine back in 2006. I'll get into that in a second. But I thought, this is interesting. I bet the Fort Detrick guys, they morphed this into weaponized Ebola, and this is why the CDC can own the patent. Now, on articles on my website, I've got the patent number. I've got a copy of it. Now, I had a CDC attorney contact me, and he says, you're wrong. It's only patent pending. And how dare you say this? And I wrote back and I said, well, I'm comfortable in what I've said because here's what it says. But even if it is patent pending, I said, what the hell's the difference? In other words, the intent is for the CDC to own Ebola. So I sat back and I thought, what would be the advantage to the CDC owning a patent on Ebola? Well, if you treat it inside the United States where you own the royalties, and if you treat a human being who has Ebola, you have altered the intellectual property of the disease and organism, so therefore the CDC would be owed a royalty. The CDC is a private corporation like the Federal Reserve that's given a government charter to operate, just like the Federal Reserve. So they have a profit motive. Let's talk about the vaccine for a second. We see evidence now in the media, starting back in August. First, it was Monsanto that was going to develop a vaccine. That gave away to GlaxoSmithKline using Tecumara Labs in San Diego to develop this vaccine they're going to have ready by January. Well, when I taught graduate research classes, we used medical modeling quite a bit to teach about control groups, double-blind, and so forth to students. And medical modeling, I learned very quickly that to bring something like this to market, you've got to go through a literature review to show that what you're doing has a basis in science. Then you have to do a computer modeling to show that it works in theory. Then you test it on lab animals. Then you test it on volunteers, usually human volunteers with nothing to lose, or they're going to die anyway. And then you have your real-life human subjects. Well, you can't do that in 5 months. It takes 3 to 5 years minimum, so no one should take this vaccine. But what I also found was a group called Crucell Labs that were involved intimately with Bill Gates and the National Institute of Health, as well as the CDC, published on their website that starting in 2004, they began to do research on an Ebola vaccine. And in 2006, I found evidence on their website that said they had tested this vaccine on 2 groups of 16 human beings in each separate trial. Now, this is where it gets really weird, guys. This is 2006 in the third quarter, 8 years ago. I think 8 years is long enough to publish your results. So I did the thing that I know how to do, and I went and researched to find the clinical findings. They don't exist. If they were there, I would have found them. Now, remember, the boys from Fort Detrick are involved. I believe the boys from Fort Detrick, it's very easy to believe that they classified the results. So we'll never know the results of the clinical trials. The thing it said on the Crucell labs is the results were promising and had worked well with monkeys, but nothing beyond that. Now, when I published this, Crucell started playing games with me. I published about the vaccine. I copied verbatim from their website. Just did a copy and paste and copied the image and put it into my articles. The next day, Crucell had taken down the page. And then I went to the Wayback Machine, and I published what was there and showed what was there now. So I did a kind of a compare and contrast before and then. And then they came back and realized they'd been caught red-handed, and they put the information back up, but on a different URL, which means, the 30, 40,000 people that had read that article that I published could not go to the same URL to find that information. This was deliberate. They participated in two obfuscations of the fact that they have a vaccine that's 8 years old with unknown clinical results. Meanwhile, the public is being told that we have to rush this vaccine to market because we're in crisis, blah, 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 blah. Now, you asked me a really good question. Why has Ebola died down? Great question. And there's a number of things that I'm looking at, none of which I can tell you conclusively, but I'll tell you where I'm leaning. You mentioned the disappearing of people. I'm getting reports on that, but I'm not getting reports to the level of credibility that I'm willing to stake a claim of this. But I will tell you common sense. Who would be behind mandatory vaccines and who'd make money off of it? Well, I can tell you it's Bill Gates. Bill Gates was involved in the Crucell labs first go-around. I believe he gave somewhere around $60 million to the effort, but it got even bigger. Recently, Bill Gates pumped in $560 million to a group called the Global Fund. And the Global Fund announced on their website they were producing 3 vaccines, one for TB, one for HIV, and one for Ebola. Now, Bill Gates didn't put over $500 million into a fund to distribute vaccines out of the goodness of his heart. He's going to expect a return on investment. So this is clearly headed towards the goal is mandatory vaccinations. And we can get into all kinds of conspiracy theories about are they going to be bad for us, will they kill us, shorten our life, destroy our central nervous system. But let me tell you why I don't think we're seeing Ebola prominently in the news now. We have entered the Christmas shopping season. The last thing you want people to do is become fearful about going out into public and congregating in crowds, which is exactly what you do on days like Black Friday and on every other day up until the end of the year. I believe they're going to let this stuff loose in a very big way in January. And January just happens to coincide where they say these vaccines that they're working on will be ready.
That's definitely something to think about, and I think you're leaning the right direction. You certainly seem to be right on so many things that you've written about in the past. Dave, we're coming up to the hard break here soon. I wasn't sure how long you want to stick with us. We'd love to have you in the second hour, but totally understand if you need to get going. If so, we wanted to give you a chance.
I set aside this time, and I'll commit to it.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to have you come on to the second hour. We've got a couple minutes before the next break. Can you tell us what's the biggest thing on your radar right now? You've got your finger on the pulse of what's really happening in the country. What's your biggest blip on the radar right now? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I got a few things incubating. I think we should touch on Ebola a little more. I want to talk about the HHS death camps, and they're provable. I've got the documents published in articles. So I want to talk about the quarantine camps, and they're no more than death camps.
Okay.
And I'll tell you how I know that. Other than that, Ebola's kind of on my back burner. I'm watching it, and I'm ready for it to surface again in January. I also can tell you how fast Ebola will spread. I've worked out the actuaries. I devised my own formula. We can talk about that. The other thing that I'm working on right now is clearly Obama Putin and the bankers are pushing us towards the Third World War. Now, we'll have medical martial law first, and then we'll have a false flag terrorist attack, in my humble opinion, that'll result in hard military martial law, and then we'll be taken into the Third World War. And we've got to go into martial law first, because if Americans understand how horrific the war that we're going to be fighting is, America would never go along with it. But if you're in martial law, your options as a population are very limited, and so are the military's options for that matter. So that's where we're headed. So what I've been doing is an analysis. First I did an analysis of Putin and how he's pushing towards war, and then I've done a couple of parts on Obama, and I'm going to do a third part tomorrow. Today I analyzed how Obama has stripped our military down. Obama, if you look at it, we are a global power militarily. The Russians are only a regional power. You've got to bring the American military down a couple of notches so the Russians can compete with us in a world war. And this is what Obama is in the middle of. And I wrote an article to that effect today. Tomorrow I'm working on the economy, and then I'm going to work on health care after that. I mean, Obama's the full meal deal. He is bent on the total destruction of this country.
Dave, if we could touch on also, I just went to a conference I went to a gathering a couple of days ago, and they talked about all the Muslim, really Muslim Brotherhood bad actors that have found their way into the White House as well. I'd like to touch on that with you if I could also after the break.
All right, folks. Well, we are to the break. Stick with us on the other side of the hour here at the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, where you have again with us Dave Hodges of the Common Sense Show. And welcome back to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show. Again, I am Jason Van Tatenhove, along with Jim White, my co-host. And as we do at the top of every second hour, we want to encourage our listeners to help keep us on the air here at Revolution Radio. We are the largest listener-supported internet radio station out there, and we need your help to do that. We've been moving away from the Google architecture on our servers, trying to keep the message of truth coming out to you, our listeners. But we need support to do that. So we ask you to vote with your wallet. If you like the information you're getting here at Revolution Radio, everything from Agenda 21 to aliens, you get it all here. Just do your part by going to freedomslips.com, click on the donate button. If you can afford to do it, any little bit is appreciated. If you can't, we understand times are tough. But please help us stay on the air and keep the lights on. Also, please visit thelibertybrothers.com. You can see some of our best interviews there. We put them up on video. Any of the purchases you make on the website go directly to helping support the Liberty Brothers show, and me and Jim keep on the air and keep our families fed and the heat on. So please go out there, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and help us get the word out. All right, once again, we are here with Dave Hodges of the Common Sense Show. And we were talking about Ebola before we left. We were a little bit touching on Putin and what was happening there with Russia and the possibility of World War III coming up. Where were we at just before the break there, Dave?
Well, I wanted to talk about the progression of Ebola.
Okay.
You've got a fellow broadcaster at Revolution Radio, a friend of mine named Paul Martin. And Paul's talking about Ebola people being disappeared according to his sources. I'm getting some of that, but not quite to the level that Paul is. I'm open to the possibility. I'm just not sure yet. But I did an actuary table based on the CDC's figures. And when I go through this with you guys, you're going to see how badly we're being lied to. The CDC says we have a transmission rate of Ebola of 2 to 1. So in other words, every person that's infected will infect an average of 2 people. Well, there was a group of researchers in Europe that fixed the Ebola transmission rate for the 7 West African countries. And I got a hold of their data from their research studies, not prominently displayed in the mainstream media, I might say. And what I suspected was that economy would be a function of how fast Ebola would spread. And my operating hypothesis was that the more money an economy has active in it and the more industrialized the economy is, the more people will congregate in crowds because you'll have more mass transit, more shopping malls, more sporting events, and so forth. So I thought that GDP, gross domestic product, would be correlated to the spread of Ebola. So I did a statistical analysis of the spreading rates of Ebola. For example, the highest was Sierra Leone at 2.53 people infected for every person that had it. And then Liberia was one of the lowest at about 1.5. Now, that's a 60% difference. That's a huge difference. I looked at the Sierra Leone economy, and it had a $9 billion GDP, and about 50% of the economy was somewhat industrialized, about 50% was agriculture. Liberia, which had a much lower transmission rate, was mostly agricultural. Almost 80% of the country's economy was agricultural, and their GDP was only $3 billion. It was at that moment that I had a holy crap fear. I mean, I thought, oh my God, when this comes to America, it's not going to be 2 to 1. I mean, it's 2.5 to 1 in Liberia. So I ran the correlation, and I did a predictive analysis of what the spread rate would be in the United States before quarantines would be enacted, and I came up with somewhere around 40 to 1. Our GDP is $17 trillion. So I thought, oh my goodness. So what I did is I created an actuary, a midstream, conservative-based actuary from the time of exposure to Ebola to the time of mortality. And let me explain to you how I came up with that. I used the CDC's own figures, so no one can say that I'm sensationalizing this. And from the time that you're exposed to the time you can contract is about 21 days. Now, I know there's groups out there like the World Health Organization says up to 42. But the mainstream figures say that usually you come down with it on about the 10th, 11th, or 12th day. So I took the median figure, which was 11 days. Now, how long do you have Ebola before you typically die? Well, those figures say from 6 to 16 days. So I took the median figure again of 11 days. And so you add to the exposure and then the progression of the virus, and you come up with a total of 22 days. Now, my fear was if I publish this, people will say you're fear-mongering, you're sensationalizing. So just for simplicity's sake and to be conservative, I tacked on an extra 8 days onto the Ebola life cycle. So a generation of Ebola is 30 days, and this is really conservative, from the time of exposure to the time of mortality. So what I looked at is I called Thomas Duncan patient 0 in August in Dallas. And I said, okay, well, in this progression, you use what's called the factor of 2. Now, remember, I'm using the CDC figures, not my projected rate that I said would be about 40 infected for every 1 because of the increased mobility of our society. So I used the 2 to 1 figure that was arrived at by the CDC, which is really a joke. And and here's how you figure this. You go to a table of 2, and this is from my old stat book. You go 2, 4, 16, 254, and so forth. And each one of those figures represents a generation of spread. So right now in the United States, we got August, September, October, and we're approaching the midway point. We should have somewhere between 250 and about 1,000 cases. Well, if they exist, they're being disappeared, no question. If they exist, the mainstream media has been told to shut up and not cover it. I don't know for sure what's happening with the spread of Ebola, but I will tell you this. By January 1, with this actuary table that I worked out, we should be seeing about 65,000 cases of Ebola because once it gets to a certain level, it spreads exponentially. And 65,000 could eventually become 4 billion if it goes out 3 more generations. In other words, when we get into March, this could go across the planet like wildfire, like the movie Contagion. This is how widespread it could be. Now, viruses burn themselves out. So I recognize it probably won't go from 65,000 to 4 billion. You'll have a burnout factor. You'll also have the quarantine factor, and then you got a mitigating experience that they may actually come up with a vaccine that lessens your chance of death. I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying these are external variables that could come into play. But we should easily get into the hundreds of thousands in this country if Ebola ever spreads. So I knew then that something funny was going on with Ebola. Either we don't have Ebola, Zaire, or Reston in the United States, and we have an artificial derivative not to spread by lethal means, but to induce fear, to get people to accept mandatory vaccines in January that'll pad the pockets of the globalists. That's really where I lean towards today. But I came across something extremely disturbing a month ago. About 31 days ago, I wrote an article, and I called HHS the sponsor of death camps. And I'm not using hyperbole when I say these terms. I found a document that with the HHS, Human Health Services, so they said they'd be in charge if there was an Ebola epidemic. And they would send people to quarantine camps. And I have a copy of a document that advertised for ambulance contracts. And what they meant by ambulance contracts is they would pick people up at the point of origin, and I'm pretty close to a quote here, and deposit them in a camp of final destination. Now, that's concerning enough. And also, when you look at Obama's executive orders issued around the same time, actually a little bit earlier, he's saying if you're just around someone with Ebola, or if you have a chest cold, or you have a cough, or you have asthma, that's enough to get you put into quarantine. And just about, they could put anyone into quarantine under these rules. But here's what really got my attention with the HHS documents. They had a list of participating agencies, and I published this on my October 11th article, I believe it was. People can Google that and come up HHS death camp for Ebola. If you put that into my search engine, you'll come right to the article. But they listed organizations as partners, such as the Department of Defense, the Department of Labor, and so all the usual suspects. But there was something conspicuously absent. You're doing medical quarantines for medical conditions. You would think that you would have medical personnel and equipment coming out the ears to treat the affected, particularly the ones who were not infected yet, but just suspected of having exposure. There wasn't one medical organization listed on the list of partners. And this sent chills down my spine. The closest they came was the American Red Cross. I mean, they didn't have the NIH, the CDC. They didn't have Doctors Without Borders. They had nothing like that. They had the American Red Cross, which is real good at passing out blankets and giving people crackers and water, but they're sure as hell not ready and able to treat Ebola. And I looked at this and I said, why would you have medical personnel for medical quarantine? It just defies logic. Well, the only answer that I can reasonably come up with, these are death camps. This is what Bill Ayers talked to Larry Graf all about. These are death camps.
Do you see, sorry to interrupt, do you see this? We've talked about this on our program before. You look at the Georgia Guidestones, and, you can debate about, how those came about and who put them up. But, you can't debate what they state. Do you really think, we've talked about this before, and I can tell you, I believe there's a program, a eugenics program that they've been running for quite some time now, and I think this is perhaps part of that. How do you feel about the whole idea of eugenics and the idea that they really don't have a use for so many of us any longer, and they want to eliminate, you can argue the numbers, maybe 70, 80, 90% of some of us. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll give you a conservative answer to start with. And first of all, I agree with your premise. The conservative answer is represented by an article I published written by Melissa Melton that's on my website. She's, girlfriend of Aaron Dykes.
They've both on our program. We've had them both on the program before. Great people.
Oh, they are wonderful researchers. Melissa is putting out stuff that's as good as out there. Aaron's already proven his worth as a reporter. And I love to run Melissa's stuff because she cuts right to the chase. And on her article that I published today, she talks about the fact that the people who were behind the creation of Obamacare want you all to die off between the ages of 70 to 75. That's my conservative answer. And Melissa really nailed it. I mean, she nailed it from so many different angles. And I'd really encourage people to go read that when they get a chance. Now, that's my conservative answer. We have death panels in Obamacare. That's eugenics. And no matter how you cut it, that's a eugenics definition. Now, are the Georgia Guidestones? Well, okay, I've written articles that I go back years on this, probably to about 2008, where I wrote articles where I put quotes from your typical globalists, Prince Charles, Jacques Cousteau, Ted Turner, and they all call for a 90% reduction in humanity. I think there's no question whatsoever that this is their ultimate aim. Now, is Ebola going to be their primary weapon? I don't think so. I think it's going to be designed to get countries into medical martial law, make the civilian population flock to the government for protection. Because you know what will happen with Ebola, and this is something I did write an article on, but I've not seen a lot about this out in either the alternative media or the mainstream media. If you get an Ebola panic, this would devastate our economy. You wouldn't have to have that many cases. You just have to have a psychological shift in your population. Right now, we go to NFL football games, we go to shopping malls, we go to movie theaters, we eat in restaurants. We have a service economy. We don't have a manufacturing economy. We have a service economy in which people trust the fact that they can go out in public in large groups and they're going to return home safely. The minute that you erode that confidence is when people stop going out. This is why I think you're hearing nothing about Ebola right now, so people aren't afraid to go in shopping malls during the Christmas season so the globalists can make their money. I believe we're going to see a big startup of this again in January, and they're just keeping enough of it in the media so we don't forget about it, but we don't panic. This would devastate our economy, and what would be the result? Well, you see in Liberia, for example, truckers won't deliver food into affected areas. You'd see the same thing here. Human nature is going to be the same regardless of your country. You'll have people preying upon each other. One of the things that Paul Martin and I have talked about, what our sources both tell us, is the military is trained to form concentric rings around big cities and just let people fight it out. Don't let them leave. Don't let them escape. Just let them fight it out. And it'll be dog eat dog, every person on their own. Your grocery stores will keep food for about 2 to 3 days. Just-in-time delivery will be gone is a concept in this country once the Ebola fear takes place. I wrote an article said we have nothing to fear but fear Ebola itself, and I addressed these issues, and I said, here's how long it would take society to unravel. And I used a lot of sociological abstracts based on other analysis to say this is how bad it would be. We would be in absolute and total chaos within 3 weeks in this country. Once you have 10% of the population who believe Ebola is enough of a threat that you don't send your kids to school, you don't go to the grocery store, even if there's food to get, you don't go to the shopping malls, you just basically self-quarantine and hope you have enough to get by until the danger passes, that would collapse the economy within 3 weeks. You'd have absolute civil unrest in this country.
Wow. Do you think we might actually be looking at the scenario this year?
No, not this year. I still go back to the globalists want to protect the Christmas shopping season where about one half of the retail money is made between Halloween and the end of the year. They're going to wait till January, and I don't think it's a coincidence that these rush-to-market vaccines by GlaxoSmithKline are coming out in January. I think this is all by design. They know exactly what they're doing.
Wow. You know, Joel Skousen, we talked to not long ago, he also thinks that we're going to be looking at World War III with Russia as well. And this Ebola thing kind of sandwiched in between, really, it doesn't bode well. Are you actively preparing for this to happen? Would you recommend our listeners begin to prepare for something like this happening right now? I mean, a lot of our listeners already are preppers. I've been a prepper for close to a decade now. Is this something we really can prepare for?
I think you can increase your odds. How much, I can't say. Prepping is not going to take you out of danger. Prepping should just increase your odds. I'll speak to my situation. I live in Maricopa County, which is basically the county that most of Phoenix is in, but I don't live in Phoenix. I work in Phoenix, but I live about 14 miles to the nearest gas station, about 15 miles to the nearest grocery store, and I live out here with about 300 neighbors, ranchers, farmers, people live on 1 and 2 acre homes. And we live in somewhat looks like a subdivision like any other community, but our properties are fairly big. I live on 1.5 acres, and we're remote, and there's only one way in and one way out. And we have a unique advantage here that most communities don't have. About 10 years ago, 11 years ago, John McCain, our senator, our illustrious senator, combined with the globalists running CAFTA, to steal our land without compensation because they wanted the water aquifer that lies underneath our properties, and they wanted to put a Canamex corridor highway through, and that's the transportation system for the Central American Free Trade Agreement. Well, I got thrust in. This is how I got into broadcasting. I was just your typical college basketball coach teaching my classes and living life and enjoying myself. And here I'm faced with economic ruination because this slug named McCain thinks it's okay to force me off my property. And so I started appearing on every talk show I could. I became the spokesperson for our group out here. And I got local radio spot up in Wickenburg, Arizona with the late Pete Peterson. And then from there, I ended up on RBN. And that's how I got started in this. But back to your point about prepping, I know most of my neighbors. I'm unique in that way compared to most Americans because we had to fight to save our homes. And eventually we did win. But a lot of my neighbors are listeners to my show. They read my articles. So they kind of know what's coming. We have a sense of community here. It wouldn't take much for us to organize a real militia out here because we organized a real strong, active political group before. So that's the preparations I take, but I don't have a hazmat suit. I don't even know how I'd get one. We shop in bulk at the various outlets, like Price Club, Sam's Club, and so forth, because we live so far away from the stores. So we have a fair amount of material. We've consciously stored water. We have a 5-year supply of canned food that I invested in. It's hidden. So people come into my house thinking I'm going to feed them. No, you don't have to kill me to get the information, and you still won't find it. So that's basically what I've done, and a lot of my neighbors are of a similar mindset. I don't have the sheep that you guys, most of you guys out there in the listening audience will have, trying to convince your sheep. But I'll say this, if I lived in the city, in a horrible place to be, but if I lived in the city, I'd have more ammunition than God, because God knows when you're going to have to use it. I'd have a close-in shotgun as people enter the home. Shotgun's your best defense. I'd have a pistol for close-in fighting. And if people decide they want to pick you off from 300 yards out and come get what you got, you better have a rifle where you can fight back. So those are your weapons essentials. You need to have as much stored food, water, and so forth that I do. You also need to store your medicines if you have anyone that has a health condition. And you can tell your doctor occasionally while you've misplaced your medicine, try to take a little less than the prescribed amount without affecting your condition so you can stockpile. Because medicine ain't going to ship either. And actually, the first casualties are going to be the infirm that don't get their insulin or don't get this or get that. They're going to be the first ones to die in what's coming. So these are some of the things, but I would also tell people, if you live in the city, you have a real reason. It's a survival requirement that you listen to shows like this on Revolution Radio and hopefully my show on the Republic Broadcasting Network, and take this information and start teaching your neighbors. And some of your neighbors will tell you that you're full of crap and that they never want to talk to you again, and some of them will embrace you, and the ones who reject you will come back to you weeks and months and sometimes years later, and they'll say, I've seen enough, I think you're right, as much as I hate to admit it. Most people will reject what you tell them out of hand, but you need to build alliances, because if you got a group, let's say a group of rogue cops or a group of Bloods and Crips who decide to band together and go house to house to get the resources that they need so their families can survive, you're not going to be able to defend your property on your own. You're going to need a community network of people that are organized and know what to do. So that would be my advice to people in terms of prepping for what's coming.
You know, Dave, we've seen, not that I think that maybe some of these issues, have a legislative solution, but you've seen the sweep by the Republicans in the most recent elections. You see things like CNN is actually just nosediving really into obscurity. You probably have more listeners on your program than CNN does on a lot of their programs. Do you think think that just based upon those two factors, and there's others that could be cited, do you think there is an awakening? I mean, more than ever, is it one of those things where, they have to accelerate their plans, and when they do that, more people become awake, and as more people become awake, they have to accelerate their plans, and so on and so forth. Do you see it being that way, or is it just are they running a carefully orchestrated plan that's running to perfection, or are they?
Well, having been a college basketball
mistakes,
coach,
I mean, are they beatable?
Well, I'll just say this: they make mistakes, and they've made mistakes. And they're game planning, and they game plan pretty well. I game planned well when I was a college basketball coach, but I can tell you, I never went into a game, no matter how well prepared my players were and how well prepared I was and know what to expect from our opposing coach. I always had to make in-game adjustments. And these globalists are having to make in-game adjustments, which means there's a degree of variability to how successful that they can be. The one thing, I want to give you a statistic that comes out of social psychology research, and it really bears to the question you're asking me. How many people do you have to wake up before all hell breaks loose and this information spreads through the population like wildfire? A group called SNARK, and for the life of me, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but they did some seminal research on the creation of fads and trends and so forth. And they asked a central research question: how many people have to be on board and committed before something spreads like wildfire exponentially? And the figure they came up with was 10%. When you have 10% of the population that's committed to an ideal, that is destined to sweep across the country. And a lot of that's based on a theory called the small world hypothesis, which postulates that all of us are connected within 6 degrees of separation from each other. And I think there's a lot of merit to this research. I think when we get to that 10% figure of committed people, not aware people, but committed people that are willing to step out on a limb and do something, then the globalists have a problem. And they are trying to stay ahead of that. If I know this 10% figure, you know darn good and well Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Rockefeller know this figure too. And they're trying to stay one step ahead of the burning bridge because people are waking up. I liken learning about the New World Order to looking at a house. And there are many different ways to get into the house. For me, it was the Central American Free Trade Agreement and the corrupt politicians trying to steal my home. For someone else, it's the loss of their income, their occupation, because the globalist free trade agreements have allowed their jobs to be shipped overseas. I mean, you can take a number of paths. You can climb in the window to the house. You can walk through the front door. You can drop the chimney like Santa. But once you get someone in that house, no matter what issue brings them to the foot of the New World Order, then they start to see it's not just my issue here. Someone else has an issue with the same kinds of people. It's just a different issue. And then all of a sudden you begin to see we're not fighting a singular set of issues here as a population. We're fighting an entire invasion and subjugation of our lifestyle and our right to exist. That's when people get committed, and that's when this country will stand up and fight.
Well, hopefully that comes sooner rather than later. I think that, that as things get worse, that it really, you can't help but to wake people up because they're more and more personally affected by it. And we're certainly seeing an increase in alternative media. Dish Network has just stopped carrying CNN, but when you have stories breaking about how the White House has got an agreement now with the media that they aren't going to be covering Ebola stories, and that just seems par for course. It just seems like people are beginning to wake up to the joke of all this propaganda in the mainstream media. Dave, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your transition, your own awakening. You talked about it a little bit. What brought you from being a college basketball coach to this doing the talk radio and kind of doing the hard-hitting investigative journalism that you're doing? Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you there personally?
Well, I did come by this suddenly and catastrophically. I mean, I had a catastrophic event facing, being economically ruined. But my dad was a naval intelligence officer, and he worked with captured German scientists in the early 1960s, where they were working on engineering and experimenting with metallurgy on vertical lift takeoff craft, like the future Harrier jet and so forth. So I knew a lot about how things happened. I read a book in 1980. In fact, I just had this gentleman on my show, and you should try to get him. His name is Patrick Wood, and he co-authored a book with Anthony Sutton called Trilaterals over Washington. And I read this book in 1980 as a very young man, and I looked at this and I said, oh, my God, we've been taken over. The Rockefellers own everything. And, of course, corporate structures have changed since 1980, but that book woke me up. But, see, I didn't have anything to act on. My life was working. My coaching career was progressing. My academic career was simultaneously progressing. I'm happily married. Things are going good. And then all of a sudden, I have this crisis where I moved into what I thought would someday become my retirement home, and I put a lot of money into it, and I realized we're screwed. And that's when I really went to work. And all the things that I had read in Patrick Wood's book and stuff I had heard from my father, he told me about globalist bankers back in the 1970s. All these things came to fruition and coalesced in my crisis, 10, 11 years ago. And so that's how I came to wake up. But for most people, as you talk to most people, they have had an encounter with the man that was negative, and they found out that everything we're being told is basically a lie. We live in a false paradigm matrix. And so everyone will come at this from a different set of conditions. The bottom line is, though, is we need to start talking, because the Obama administration is creating victims. Every day he creates more victims among Americans. And if people just hear us talking, they don't have to believe it, but if they just hear us talking about how bad things are and how evil this man is and how he serves the globalist bankers, they want 90% of us dead, most people are going to say, you guys are nuts. Don't you have a real life that you can get back to rather than talk about this fantasy crap? Then all of a sudden their life starts to go south because of Obama, and they start seeking answers, and our words will be ringing in their ears. That's why we got to keep talking. We'll eventually get to people. The question is, do we have enough time? I want to talk to you about one thing. We almost had a huge history-turning event back at the time Ambassador Stevens was killed. I wrote about this morning as part of my article on how Obama is dismantling the military. When Chris Stevens was murdered, and he was murdered because they wanted to cover up the fact that he was running guns to al-Qaeda, both in Libya and the Gaddafi overthrow and attempted overthrow of Assad in Syria. He was trafficking in kids. He was trafficking in drugs to fund this operation. It was Air America, Middle East style. And you couldn't have him, this was starting to leak out, so you couldn't have it leak out any further. So a little over 2 months for the election, they had to eliminate him. Well, Admiral Guyette, head of Carrier Strike Force 3, the number 3 commander in the Middle East, and General Ham, the commander of AFRICOM, the guy in the Middle East at that time, knew that Stevens was under distress, and Ham went to rescue him against the orders of Leon Panetta via Obama and Clinton. And General Ham, or Admiral Guyette, was giving intelligence information with overflights. And he didn't engage, but they were providing surveillance. Well, Colonel Rodriguez of the CIA, now General Rodriguez, stopped Ham by arresting him. Guyette was discovered before they could launch the rescue operation, and he was arrested too, and their careers were destroyed. Now, what I've been told by my military sources is their goal, they saw an opportunity there. If you rescue Chris Stevens, and he knows he's been set up for murder, under an agreement, a plea agreement of immunity, he probably would have told everything he knew about the Obama administration and what was truly going on in the Middle East and how depraved it was. This would have brought this administration down. The military already felt the pressure because so many of the senior command officers are being fired. So Guyette and Ham launched what I considered to be a military coup. And this military coup almost succeeded. And had they rescued Stevens, we would have had a military coup. Now, one of two things would have happened. The military would have taken over the White House, or Congress would have responded to the pressure and do what they should be doing now and impeach Obama and convict him in the Senate and put him in prison, along with Panetta, along with Hillary Clinton, Van Jones, Valerie Jarrett, and all the other host of communist criminals should be put away. We came so close to this back in 2012. I mean, it's one of the great tragedies in American history that these two brave men who sacrificed their careers, and by the way, no one knows where Guyette is. There's speculation he's been done away with. I don't know if that's true or not. But the reality is, guys, is it's going to take the military to develop a backbone and stand up like Guyette and Ham did and oppose this president.
Now,
well, go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, Dave, do you fear for a military coup? It seems so often we've seen in history that the military takes over and then, it doesn't necessarily go the way that people had hoped. I guess we as long as they're good constitutionally based people that are steadfast on bringing back the republic, I just would worry about it because I've seen so many times in history where military coups have not worked out.
It's my fear too. But sometimes desperate times require desperate actions. It is a very, very high-risk gamble, and I totally agree with you. Indeed. But if we keep heading down the path we're going, we don't have the technology, we don't have the leadership to take on the Obama administration. He's got Russians and Chinese trading on our soil. He's got UN troops here who the Russians and Chinese will be a party to once the poop hits the fan. Excuse me, we know that UN vehicles were sighted in our country this last summer. They're going to join into this. They're going to be part of the Force Act. If you look up a document called FM 39.4, which are the new FEMA camp, they're called internment and resettlement documents, they talk about the use of foreign assets to man these camps. And then there'll be extermination camps, which is why they're going to use foreign soldiers and not American soldiers. That's the direction this country is headed. And then I find the HHS documents for the quarantine camps, which are no more than death camps, same story, second verse. So we look at all this, guys. This is the path we're headed down towards total destruction. I'll take my chances with a military coup before I will with Obama.
Now, Dave, who do you think would be good to say run that coup? We've heard General Vallely, retired General Vallely, talk about this before with the Patriot Spring and whatnot. Do you think who do you think would be a good to lead something like that?
Excuse me. I would say it's impossible to tell you, because once a coup starts, it takes a life of its own. Leadership tends to emerge in a coup, not be established in the beginning, and also you have the danger that the leaders of a coup may not be the people that finish the coup because of assassination. So I don't think I could really say that for sure. I can tell you that there are generals in retirement who I've talked to, some of them have been kicked out by Obama, that are willing to join such an effort. And there is talk, and has been talk since Benghazi, of doing just what I'm talking about.
Wow.
Indeed, you are correct. Let's talk for a second, if we could, Dave, about false flag. It's my belief, and I don't want to speak for Jason. I think he feels the same way. I think, no doubt, Sandy Hook, false flag. Boston bombing, likely a false flag. We can go throughout history, the false flag method used by governments to really strike fear in their people. Do you see, and I think you may have touched on this earlier, do you see a false flag on the horizon here in our country? And if so, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what's the most likely scenario? And I know we talked about maybe the Ebola. That might actually be the false flag, but strike that, the Ebola. What other thing? You think another bomb, maybe another, maybe you heard something about Chicago. Some reports have been coming out now. Apparently this hacker.
I wrote about Chicago back in 2011 for a lot of reasons. Here's the scenario I see, and here's how I arrive at this. This is speculation on my part, but this kind of goes back to my days of coaching. When I look at an opponent and I say, how are they going to come at us? I try to put myself in the place of that other coach. and I look at what we have and what he has and think about how he could attack us. Well, I've had enough experience now writing about the globalists that I'm getting, I think, decent. Actually, I think I'm getting pretty good at looking into their playbook and telling you what's going to come next. A real clear pattern has emerged. We're going to go into medical martial law, and I think Ebola or something like Ebola is going to be the catalyst. And once we're in medical martial law, then we'll see a false flag attempt or event, whether it's an EMP, and I think a simulated EMP where they don't really take down the grid and destroy it entirely. They just tell the people they've done that. Terrorists have detonated nuclear bombs over America and the EMPs happen. I could see them lying to us, causing some power outages, so we'll subjugate and give in to them entirely, and we'll be under total martial law. Now, remember what I said earlier. The goal of martial law is to eliminate all political opposition. And once that political opposition is removed, then we start to see a series of false flag attacks designed to provoke the American emotions, and the Russians and the Chinese will be blamed for it, and this will become the psychological impetus to get the people to accept World War III. So I see martial law coming in two parts. The first part will be medical martial law. The second part will be a real series of false flag events. And I don't think it's going to be one. My understanding it's going to be several. And you mentioned Chicago. I wrote about this in 2011 in May. And I came across FEMA coffins being stored by Gary, Indiana officials. We actually reported on this on a news segment of my show at the Common Sense Show. And we think that Chicago was set up for a lot of reasons. They actually rehearsed this when they had the NATO conference there in South Chicago in 2011. And then I came across a guy named Jeff Joe Black. And he was a little on the eccentric side. And I have to speak about him in the past tense because he was murdered. He was after a lot of things in Chicago. He was after Rahm Emanuel, said just like Obama, he didn't deserve to run for the mayor of Chicago because he hadn't been a true resident and so forth and so on. But the one thing Jeff really talked about, he said, we're going to get nuked in Chicago. And he pointed to some of the very same evidence that I wrote about in an article that I published on Freedom's Phoenix in 2011 before I had my website. And I asked Jeff to come on my show, and he agreed, and then he backed out. He said he was going into hiding. About a year later, Jeff resurfaced. And Jeff said, Dave, I want to come back on your show. I'm going to tell you what I know, blah, blah, blah. So we set a date about a month out. And in that interim, Jeff got murdered. He got thrown off a bridge in Pennsylvania onto an interstate highway. Now, it's kind of funny. The death was ruled as an accident, but the police, according to the newspaper article, were investigating it as a homicide. He was murdered. He was murdered for what he was talking about, for what he knew. He was a member of We Are Change. I think it was We Are Change Chicago or We Are Change Illinois. I forget which one, but he was a member of that group, and some of those people actually contacted me after his death. And we shared notes, and we came to the firm conclusion that he was murdered because he was talking about this. I think Chicago is a real target. And you want some fuel to this. What was it, a couple of years ago? Obama sold his Hyde Park home in Chicago and relocated to Hawaii, his private residence. Nothing like getting out of Dodge before the poop hits the fan. So I think that's real possible. But to answer your question, medical martial law followed by false flag events that will bring military martial law followed by World War III. Now, what's the goal of World War III? Well, the goal of World War III is really simple. It's about exterminating as many people as humanly possible while the globalists are safely tucked away under places like Denver International Airport. And then you have 90% of the population destroyed, and you have just fought and won a war of economic and governmental consolidation. One world government, one world economy. That's where I think this is headed. And the basic, and I can tell you how this sets up. And I've written about this extensively in the last 2 years over a period of time. I'm trying to think of where to start on this. The derivatives debt is the place to start. The bankers from Basel, the Bank of International Settlements, the people who basically run the central banks of the world, who run the governments of the world, the Bank of International Settlements put out something called credit derivative swaps, And these were money games, Ponzi schemes, where a lot of people in the early days made a lot of money, but then they went belly up. And this caused the need for the bailouts starting in 2008, and they still continue today. The credit derivative swaps, the debt on that for the United States is estimated to be about $1.5 quadrillion. Well, that's pretty tough to pay off because the entire GDP of the planet's about $79 trillion. So we're never going to pay off that debt. So what that did is that put the bankers in crisis. And simultaneously, see, the Bank of International Settlements wants to pit one side against the other and force a war. So what they did was they helped to create and start the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, so forth. And what did they start to do immediately? They started to undermine the petrodollar. Now, the American dollar is afloat despite the $17 trillion debt because the world comes to us to buy dollars to go buy oil in the Middle East. That gives us our backing just the same as if we were on the gold standard. But now you see the BRIC nations buying the petrodollar. No, not anymore. What they're doing is they're using gold to purchase Iranian oil, which is why we want to invade Syria first, Iran second, and save the Federal Reserve. Now, I hate the Federal Reserve like anybody else who knows what's going on. But we want the petrodollar to survive for a while longer, guys, because we don't have jobs to go to tomorrow if that petrodollar collapses. Well, this was the central bank scheme of the Bank of International Settlements to pit the BRIC nations against the West, primarily NATO nations. And the war that's lining up right now will be China, Russia, and their BRIC allies against the United States and whatever is left of NATO. And Germany may actually join the BRICS. There's a lot of talk, and I actually have been talking about this for 2 years. The Germans, it would make economic sense for them to partner with Russia since they get 35% of their gas from them. So I could see Germany leaving NATO. Now, we are, as I said earlier, we're a global power militarily, and Obama is taking us down. He's destroying our leadership by firing 300 senior command officers. He's decimated the nuclear command structure. He's cut back combat readiness. I could go on and on about what he's done to this military. This is deliberate. This is deliberate because America could defeat China and Russia together if the military was left intact. But what Obama's doing is making us vulnerable to attack. And so I believe the Third World War is set up to devastate all three sides, China, Russia, United States, and everybody else participating. And out of chaos, as the globalists like to say, will come order. And this is my operating hypothesis on where all this is leading.
We had, I'm sure you're familiar with Joel Skousen. We had Joel Skousen from, I forget the name of his website. I apologize. I have it linked on my website, World Affairs Brief. We had him on the radio here, Dave, and I did actually a video with him maybe 6 weeks ago. He believes that there's going to be a nuclear war as well. By his estimations, he doesn't think that China and Russia will be ready until about 2020. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think? No, I'm not. It's information. I think Joel Skousen's a pretty smart guy. I like Joel. I don't think that he would intentionally pass off bad information. But what's your thoughts on that? Do you think we got that much time?
You might. The martial law isn't going to be we do it on Friday and go to war on Saturday. The martial law is about what's going on right now with Obama. This is a better way to look at this. Obama is turning every organization in our country on its ear. He's destroying every aspect of constitutional democracy in this country. Our republic form of democracy is on the skids. Martial law could systematically take away all of it over time. You need to listen. No American, if they knew what was coming in the war with regard to the pandemic releases of biowarfare, to nuclear weapons, to genocide of occupation troops, the rape of Nanking could happen here in the United States, could be the rape of San Antonio. You look at all these events, and to get us into a state of martial law where the American people can't rise up, you have to have time to get our guns. I mean, the guns have to be taken before we go to war. You have to eliminate all domestic, opposition. This could take 3-4 years. Now, in all respect to Mr. Skousen, I think the Russians are pretty close to being ready now. I think the Chinese are pretty close to being ready now. I think this could happen sooner than 2020. I think it can happen as early as 2017. I just don't know if America will be subjugated enough by that point to where the people won't oppose what's coming. I mean, we're talking here in the United States. If we go to war, and it's all total war, all-out war, we could have 80, 90% of our country perish. Who's going to go along with that? Well, if your food comes from the government, and a lot of your people are living in camps, you go through all the whole scenario here. If Ebola's ripped through your country already, you need the government to protect you. Most of the people will look at the government as their third parent in that kind of situation. That could take anywhere between 2 to 5 years. So, Mr. Skousen could be right. I think it could happen anytime between 2017 and 2020. It will not go beyond 2020. I'm pretty sure of that.
Wow. So, Dave, I want to change gears here just a little bit. You've talked about so many of your guests who have come to, not necessarily guests, but different people bringing up truth and trying to shine a light of truth on some of this darkness that's creeping in all around us. How dangerous do you think it's going to get for those of us in alternative media and those of us that are activists that are trying to fight the good fight? Do you think we're going to see a lot more of these mysterious deaths and disappearances? How dangerous is it going to be to be spreading the message of liberty and truth?
I don't think we're going to see real widespread taking out of journalists because I think they'll take the internet down.
Do you think that's happening pretty soon? Can you elaborate on that?
I don't have a feel. Obama's just done something with net neutrality in the FCC in terms of what he told them to do, and certainly that could erode some of our freedoms. McCain has introduced 3 pieces of legislation to take away internet freedom. That actually was about 3 years ago. He wanted to have bloggers fined $300,000 for offensive comments of public officials. I think that they're going to take down the net. I don't see widespread kidnappings and exterminations of media figures. It could happen now. See, the reason I think Breitbart, Hastings, and Clancy were taken out is because they were spreading a message that was too much before its time, too early, could wake up too many people, and they weren't ready to take down the net. So you had to eliminate those 3 journalists. But as we move closer, we face the possibility of having our main communications device taken away, the internet. I think it's real possible that's the way they'll silence us.
Absolutely. Well, we are coming up to the end of the show here, Dave. I want to give you a chance to talk about any other subjects that might be on your mind you want to talk about real quick, and then, of course, give you a chance to give out your website where our listeners can hear your show and get more information on what you're doing.
Okay, well, thank you. I suppose the biggest thing that I want to leave people with is if you're awake, you have an obligation to help wake up other people. And the other thing that I hope the new generation of people who are awake, the next generation of talk show hosts, people that write articles and stuff, the people that haven't done so yet but soon will, you need to do a better job than the people from my generation have done. We have way too much infighting. We have way too much territorialism. We have this network tearing down network and one writer criticizing another writer. Look, here's the bottom line. Does it really matter if the Russians are going to be ready in 2017 or 2020? The end result is still the same. We don't need to engage in these intramural debates that are extremely corrosive and destructive to our effort to wake people up. So the next generation of activists that come into play, you can't look at people from other networks and other websites as your enemy. We are all partners in trying to save humanity. I mean, we're talking about a goal of exterminating 90% of all humanity. We need to set aside our petty differences and band together. That's the takeaway message that I want to leave people as you wake up and begin to participate in this activism. And the way that you can follow my work is go to thecommonsenseshow.com. I run some guest articles. I publish an article every day. And my show airs on the Republic Broadcasting Network from 9 p.m. to midnight Central every Sunday evening, and you can go to thecommonsenseshow.com to listen to the show. I've got a built-in server. That's the easiest way to go to get there.
You know, Dave, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time. Great interview. Great time having you on with us. Why don't you let us know, who do you have coming up here? I don't know how far out you schedule for your show. Give us an idea of some of the people maybe you have coming up as guests, or at least on your radar anyway.
Well, I'm rerunning the Pat Wood interview because I'm taking this Sunday off for family reasons. On the 23rd, I'm doing my brand of presenting the Kennedy assassination. I'm asking the audience to join in. And on the 30th, I have John B. Wells, a good friend of mine, and we're going to compare notes. And on the 7th, I have 3 hours with Jim Mars. So that's what's coming up in the near future.
Wow, Jim Mars, what a great guest. That guy is a sharp cat, man. He certainly knows. He
was my hero before I got into this stuff. I used to read all his stuff.
Yeah, who were your? We're going to be coming up here. The music will start any moment. Who were some of your other inspirations? Do you listen to Alex Jones?
Alex covers the stuff he covers with great precision, and he has great guests.
All right, well, that is the end of the show. Thanks for joining us on the Liberty Brothers. We'll be back again tomorrow, same time, same channel.
Good night.